Hello, everybody. I'm going to be talking today about a holiday in the axis of evil. And essentially, my talk today is probably going to differ from the other talks you've heard today, because essentially I'm just going to be showing you some photographs from my holiday. So it's a bit of a glorified holiday slideshow. I have to say, although I'm credited as working for the university, I did go to North Korea under my own steam. It wasn't on official university business, so we should probably clear that up straight away. Axis of evil, that's obviously the term that George Bush, the US president, coined North Korea along with some other countries who he thought could potentially be harbouring terrorists. So that's why I've used that. It's not necessarily my own personal thought of North Korea. Why did I go to North Korea? Well, I could, really. I guess that was the main reason. You can only visit North Korea as a tourist if you're in China, and I happened to be in China last September, so several £100s later, I found myself on a flight to Pyongyang. Anyone can go to North Korea, even Americans, as tourists, apart from spies and journalists. So if you fall into that category, don't go applying for your visa just yet. I don't particularly want to talk about the political issues in terms of what I know about North Korea. I'm really going to talk about what I saw, which, of course, is going to be very different to what we read about in the papers. But I wanted to talk about it from my perspective for this. But I guess a little bit of background is important. This is North Korea. The first rule of North Korea is you don't call it North Korea when you're in North Korea. It's the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea. But I think for the purpose of this talk, I'll just call it North Korea. It's a lot quicker. This is North Korea. North Korea and South Korea, the Korean Peninsula, have been invaded thousands of times throughout their history, annexed by Japan in 1910, and then at the end of the Second World War, when Japan was defeated, which the North Koreans will tell you they defeated. They never mentioned the atomic bomb. It was under the control of the Kim family, which it has been to the present day. We obviously had the atrocious war, 1950 to 1953. So you had the Soviets and the Chinese supporting the North and the Americans supporting the South. That war essentially is still going on today, although a treaty has been signed, but in effect the war is still going on, and the countries border each other on the 38th parallel, which is the most heavily fortified border in the world. So, going to North Korea. This is us, the group, arriving at Pyongyang International Airport. We flew over on a Russian aeroplane, so old, in fact, that it's illegal to fly in European airspace. But it was a very smooth flight, I can't complain. The air stewardesses on the flight, they were Malaysian, they weren't North Koreans, and they were all in the in-flight safety video as well, so they were obviously doubling up there. We had a very nice chicken microwave sandwich on the plane, in case you're wondering, and we were all given a copy of the Pyongyang Times, which is the English newspaper that comes out of North Korea, and had lots of stories about what Kim Jong-un was up to. Incidentally, the in-flight safety video was accompanied to a Casio version of the Cranberry song In Dreams. So you can imagine. And we also had a classical group. They were kind of like a state-sanctioned Spice Girls, that was the in-flight film. So we met our tour guide and our bus driver, Mr. Lee. He had 5 stars on his bus, which meant that he had successfully driven 5,000 kilometres without injuring anybody. I was told, and this is, I don't know if I should say this, but I was told there was an incident with the cyclist, but that was brushed under the carpet. So here we are in Pyongyang. I wanted to show you, I actually arrived in the dark, and I would love to have shown you a picture of what Pyongyang looks like in the dark, but essentially it would have been a blank screen because all the electricity gets turned off at 9 p.m. So I've taken one in the day so you can see what it looks like. Very much like Leeds. If you've been to Leeds, Pyongyang looks like Leeds. It even has the grey mist that surrounds Leeds. Also surrounds Pyongyang, much of North Korea, and that's the Taedong River there. And you can see there was lots of these boats that were just dredging the river continuously throughout my stay. One of the things that I loved about Pyongyang was the massive building that you can see in the background of the photograph. That's a bit of a white elephant because no one would talk about this building. I've done some research. It's the largest concrete building ever built. It was scheduled to open as a hotel 30 years ago. 7,000 rooms, 5 revolving restaurants. North Koreans love a revolving restaurant. I'll give them that. I went to one in the hotel that we stayed at. But unfortunately, the building will never open to the public because it's sinking on its own foundations. So every time we asked to get closer, to take a picture, or to go and visit it, we were just met with a blank response. Okay, so this is the hotel we stayed at, the Yangako International Hotel. Very pleasant hotel. It has 1,000 rooms. I would say probably only about 3 floors were open, and you could tell that from the lights on the evening. It's on an island in the middle of the river, so it's perfect for tourists because they can't get in or out unless there's somebody with them. And they also had this lovely, well, I say lovely, but they had a turtle in reception, which I actually thought was dead, but on the 3rd day I saw bubbles come out of its mouth, so it wasn't. Okay, so the first day we went to Kumsusan Palace of the Sun. Now this is where Kim Il-sung, the eternal president, and he's called that because essentially he is still ruling North Korea, although he's been dead for many years. The people genuinely believe that he is ruling from death, basically. But he's lying in state, and we saw him and Kim Jong-il in this massive, I mean, it's a shame I couldn't take photographs inside here. It was absolutely incredible. After we saw their bodies individually and bowed 3 times from 3 different locations to them, and all statues of them within the palace, we were then taken to a room where we saw the trains that they travelled on, their car, which was essentially a Mercedes-Benz on a couple of breeze blocks, and then the yacht which they travelled on, and they even had papier-mâché river, so we could tell that it would have floated in times gone past. We then went into a room to see all the thousands of honorary doctorates that they'd got, most of them from Peru. Sadly, none from the University of Birmingham, but I did find a stone that was given to them from the county of Derbyshire. So if anybody knows anything about that, I'd love to know more afterwards. These are some women here in traditional dress. Saw lots of these women. They were dressed up like this for special occasions, and obviously going to pay their respects to the eternal president and dear leader, Kim Jong-il, is a real big thing for them, and we had to go in a tie and a shirt, and these are dresses that most of them make themselves. A lot of synthetic fibre goes into the making of one of those, yeah, I wouldn't go near one of those with a match. Okay, unfortunately, by showing you this slide, I've actually broken the law in North Korea, and I do apologise for that, so I hope there's no one here from the Secret Service in the DPRK. The reason why being it's illegal is that picture at the top of the statue of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. You're not allowed to take a photograph of the Kims in any form unless you have the whole body, so from the head right to the toe. So therefore, I wanted to bring a newspaper back. Some colleagues at work had asked, can you bring a newspaper back from North Korea? I wasn't allowed because the tour guide worried that I would fold an image of the Kims to fit it in my suitcase, and it's illegal. So we weren't allowed to bring anything home that had their image on. But this is the Grand Monument. Again, it's another place where people will go and pay their respects to the Kim dynasty. And as you can see here on these pictures, people are queuing up, and they were very solemn. And it was, for them, it was a very emotional experience, and we very much respected that. Next, we went to the Fatherland Liberation War Museum. The picture you can see in the top left-hand corner are a massive row of tanks, American tanks that were captured. And they were very proud of this, that they'd captured them from the Americans. And that's the main museum on the right-hand side. Unfortunately, again, I couldn't take pictures inside, but I can assure you it looks like a Las Vegas casino from about 1960s. Not really what you'd expect. If you've been to the Imperial War Museum, it didn't really have the same kind of feel. This is the USS Pueblo here. This is the only US ship, captured ship, that's on display, not in the US, obviously, and the only one that's a tourist attraction as well. And again, they were very proud about this. It must be very difficult for an American tourist to go and visit North Korea because you're basically told all the time how awful you are. So, from a British person, I couldn't really relate to that, but I imagine it was very difficult. And that was our tour guide. Most of the museums we went to, they had some kind of military guide that would show us around. She's all smiles there, but she was very, very serious in the museum itself. We were there over National Day in September, the 7th, I think it's the 9th of September, 65 years since the DPRK was founded. This picture doesn't really capture what we saw. We weren't allowed to go to the main parade, the ones that you've probably seen on television with all the tanks and the missiles and the like. But this was the supplementary parade. And 10,000 soldiers drove past us on trucks, waving with bayonets, rocket launchers and all sorts. But these weren't actually part of the main army. They were train drivers, bus drivers, and we saw, obviously, the obligatory female soldiers in stilettos as well. They were part of this parade. And it was very euphoric, it was very exciting, but just to put it into context, it was about 10% of the British Army that, that we saw, and these were just supplementary soldiers. We then went to the park. Now, I really enjoyed this because I got to dance with some North Koreans. In fact, there was 2 women who were vying for my attention. You can see the woman there in the sort of light green, and the one next to her on the right. They were kind of like my dance rivals. And it was amazing because it was a real good chance for us to socialise with, what we were led to believe were normal people who lived in Pyongyang. But obviously, at the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, to live in Pyongyang, you have to be invited. You can't just move there. You're invited by the government. So these are senior people in senior roles. And although everyone was happy, and obviously we couldn't really talk because we didn't share a language, but it did feel quite genuine, although there was still a part of me at the back of my mind thinking, was this a setup, was this a setup? And that kind of continued throughout the trip. You never were really sure whether you were at real life or some kind of dystopian Disneyland. Not much to say about this. It's the Arch of Triumph, other than it's 10 metres taller than the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. That was a recurring theme with the monuments we saw in North Korea. They were taller, bigger, fatter, wider than their Western counterparts. It's made up of 27,000 blocks, and that equates to 1 block for every day of the life of Kim Il-sung. Now, if you do ever get the chance to go to North Korea, I would say go in September, because this Arirang Mass Games was the most incredible thing I've ever seen in my life. It takes a Eurovision halftime show and times it by about 3 million. The Arirang Mass Game, Arirang is a ballad. It's a ballad shared between North and South Korea. And it's a very sad story. It's very similar to Romeo and Juliet. And off the back of that, they've created this show, which now is very obviously highly politicized, looks at North Korea's relationship with the world, particularly with Russia and China. And it actually features 100,000 performers. They perform 3 nights a week in August and September time. And the screen at the back, when I walked into the arena, I thought it was an LED screen, but each one of those sort of pixels is a child holding a card. And they would flip them over at incredible speed because it was animated. It looked like you were watching a television screen. So there's 20,000 children there, and in the foreground there was up to 80,000 performers, about 2,000 professionals, but the rest were volunteers who would practice for months on it. And it was, regardless of what you think of North Korea, they can really put on a show. It was absolutely incredible. So we went to the Korean demilitarized zone. As you can see on the far, that's South Korea. Not a lot was happening there. It was talked about quite a lot during the trip, and the North definitely talk about this kind of reunification process, and they talk about it within our lifetime. And there's definitely, they definitely want to be reunified with the South. They have they share their folklore, they share a history, and it was very interesting being there, that they're so close but so separate at the same time. For example, even in South Korea as well, like we pay VAT, they're paying for a tax that will pay for whatever happens when reunification comes. So there is a big, there's things happening behind the scenes for something to happen. But the problem is, each country is not willing to concede to the other country's regime, and that's where the issue is. We travelled back from the demilitarized zone on the Youth Hero Motorway. A few years ago, all the universities in North Korea were closed. 50,000 students went to build a brand new motorway, and it was amazing. We were on this motorway. It was like the M6 toll without the extortionate prices, for 200 yards. And they'd been building this for 2 years, we were told. You're probably not really interested in your railway museums. I like trains myself. The reason why I'm showing this is most of the museums we went to visit didn't have any, they weren't really about what you were there to see or what you thought you were going to there to see. I thought I was going to see some trains in a railway museum, but of course it was about how the Kims used the railway network. It wasn't about what the railway network did for the country. And most of the museums were like this. We went to an agricultural museum and we saw a cabinet of Wellington boots just because one of the Kims had looked at them. This is in fact, and this was massive. It was probably about the same size of this curtain. And it was just listing all the train journeys that Kim Jong-il had made during his lifetime. Which were quite a lot, actually, because he was afraid of flying. You can see there where he travelled through Russia quite a lot on the trains because he didn't want to fly. This was the Children's Palace. Exceptional, literally went from room to room to room, and it was child genius after child genius after child genius, and they were all singing about their praise for the Kim dynasty. The Pyongyang Metro, the deepest metro system in the world. There doubles as a nuclear bomb shelter, should they ever require one. The rolling stock, incidentally, is from East Berlin, so it was quite weird going into a railway carriage, and it has the pictures of the Kims there at the back, as most buildings and rooms did, but the graffiti on the windows was all German. But they were beautifully decorated. I don't know if anybody's been on the Moscow underground, but it was very similar to that in terms of how beautiful it was. This was something that I saw a couple of times, sort of people doing, well, not very much really. This lady was cutting grass with scissors. And North Koreans work 6 days a week. Sunday is the holiday, but most of them volunteer to work for the state on the Sunday. So they end up doing jobs like this, and they volunteer to do that, so we were told. We went to the Grand People's Study House. This is the main library. They had a very extensive English language collection, we were told, although I only saw a history of German Shepherd dogs and how to go yachting. And we also went to the music library as well. You can see down here, there was like about 100 boom boxes from the 80s, and they proudly brought out this Beatles CD. I asked if they had anything else, and I was told that they didn't have time to get it out. This is another famous view of Pyongyang. This is where the main parades happen. If you've seen it on the television, as I said before, with the missiles and the tanks, and it's where a lot of activity happens, on a grand scale. In the background, you've got the Juche Tower, one of the only things that was lit up at night in Pyongyang, and that celebrates the Juche ideology, which is sort of their form of communism, which mixes in the personality cult. So they have the sickle, the hammer, but they also have the paintbrush, which is the intellectual. And this is from the Juche Tower. Looking back, you can see the giant concrete hotel there. And then you've got these new buildings. And things are happening in North Korea. We watch these documentaries on television, and I almost feel that some of them are there to scare us. Because, the things that I saw, there were cars there. I mean, there weren't a lot of cars, but I did see cars there. And there was lots of building work going on. I mean, by our architecture standards, they don't look very much, but seeing what else we saw in North Korea, these looked amazing. And they're housing about 200,000 people, we were told. So something is happening there. And I think, one of the reasons why I decided to go to North Korea was because I really do hope that things change there, And people say, oh, well, is it a bit sick, really, that you wanted to go? And I said, well, no, because I'm here now talking to you about it, and you're going to think about it, and you're going to talk to other people about it. So it's about spreading that knowledge and those ideas as well, and sharing that with other people. And North Korea at the moment is a country that's really living in the past, but it's got a really interesting future, and I'm sure it's one that we're all going to be looking at very closely indeed. Thank you.